This week on our YouTube channel, somebody asked a very good question regarding how you find a research gap when you're looking to apply for university. So I'm going to provide you with some examples based on my own experience, and obviously for those of you who are watching or listening, if you want to add your viewpoints as well, more than welcome. So you're looking for the best way to find a research gap when trying to figure out how your niche is going to best help administrators, people on the admission side stop and go, oh my gosh, we should have this person come to university. You're going to need to do a lot of reading. One of the things I kept reminding myself is like, oh my gosh, I feel like my eyes are constantly going like this all the time because you spent a lot of your time in research reading. So, for example, when I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do as an anthropologist when I was looking to apply for PhD programs, in the early stages, I remember finding an article by a guy named Thomas Kager, who is a journalist based out of Bolzano, which ended up being where I did my field work. And my background was in education. It was it was actually a policy article. But within that policy article, there was a small paragraph in there that talked about how in South Tyrol they practice what is referred to as separate but equal education. Now, having grown up in the States, separate but equal education was not so separate but equal. And I wanted to know more because it turned out in South Tyrol they have legally segregated schools. And that means that Italian speakers go to one set of schools, German speakers go to another set of schools. If they have to study in the same building, they go through separate doorways. And yes, this does exist today. They have segregated playgrounds that are divided by pieces of equipment. In the past, it used to be divided by actual fences. And this is supported by the EU to protect the German-speaking minority. So I see this paragraph and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like wild. How is this even legal today? So I tried to find more information, and the more I tried to look, the more I realized I can't find anything. Why can't I find anything? So that's when I started to think maybe there's a gap in research, which leads me to my second point. When you're trying to figure out where the gaps are, it's important to talk to people. That could be researchers in your field. It could be, in some cases, politicians. I mean, sometimes, in a lot of cases, if you're doing field work, for example, you can go in with a topic thinking you're going to study one thing and then get there, and then you end up realizing there are more gaps and more things that you didn't know about, and you end up changing your topic. That is common in social sciences, in those who are doing PhDs or DPhils. But when you're talking to people, you need to ask them, what sort of issues are they coming across when they're doing research that they think, oh man, it would have been really useful if we had more information on X. That could be your opportunity to go, well, let me look to see what's available. Let me see if I could be that person that could figure out that problem. For example, when I was doing field work, again, you're talking to, researchers in the field. You might be talking to politicians. You might even be talking to friends who are also looking at similar stuff, and then you start to realize, okay, this is the gap that maybe I could explore. In my case, I went to a dinner party, and I was talking to parents about my work on South Tyrol, and they were really interested in that. And in talking to the parents, I said, it's a real shame that we can't talk about segregation in schools, because if we do, we get silenced, we get canceled. And I was like, okay, tell me a little bit more about this. And I started to realize, which leads me to my next point, that it was really helpful for me to be a foreigner, because I could, quote unquote, get away with, and I use that term very lightly, I was able to do research that locals could not do, because if you were a local, you could lose funding, for example, and it's fairly highly contentious. And as an outsider, I didn't really have those concerns or those issues or those pressures on my back, which gave me more flexibility to look at this gap and try my best to fill it as best as possible. That being said, when you find a gap or a series of gaps, my final point is that you need to ask yourself, what is it going to take to answer that? Are you going to be in a position where you have funding from a department and so you can hire a team? Or are you going to be like myself, where it's just you on your own and you've got to figure it out? In my case, when I was doing field work, I had a background in Italian. but where I was living was predominantly German speaking. And I didn't have the finances to hire a translator, even though I worked with a lot of German speakers. That just wasn't an option that was available for me. So I had to make a decision. Do I focus on the German speaking community, or do I focus on the Italian speaking community? I only had 1 year. My visa only lasted 1 year, so I made the decision to focus largely on the Italian speaking community and focus on the issues through their perspective. And then any interviews that I did with German speakers, either I did it in Italian or I did it in English, in order to fill that gap of the research. So those would be my three main points. Circling back, make sure you do a lot of reading. You're going to do a lot of reading. Make sure you talk to as many people as possible to see what sort of issues they're coming up against. And then once you have an idea of where you think that gap is, figure out whether or not that's something you can do on your own, or whether or not you're going to need help and what that's going to look like. If you have any questions about applying for PhDs, DPhils, or anything regarding research at all and how to prepare for that when going abroad, as always, feel free to leave a message in either YouTube, TikTok, or wherever you can find us on social media. Otherwise, as always, I will see you next week.